Welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Burke, and I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. And today I am joined by my wonderful, amazing, and beautiful co host,
Ben Wilson. I do ML stuff at Databricks.
Yes. And today, so we've actually been talking for an hour. And what we are going to talk to you about today is building stuff that sucks, or more precisely, avoiding building stuff that sucks. So this was born out of me complaining over the past 60 minutes about a variety of projects that just don't make sense. I'm working with some customers. Obviously, we're not going to name names. And they're very skilled and smart and good at communicating and collaborating, and they're just perfect in every way, except for this one thing where they build things that might not be necessary or even valuable. So, Ben, when you are told to build something that you think does not make sense, what goes through your mind? How do you think about evaluating whether that manager or that requesting person is making sense and thinking logically?
So I'm going to have to step back a few years to answer that, because that most certainly does not happen anymore. There's an overwhelming process that occurs within my job now, where many very brilliant people are looking at feature requests and like, what should we be working on? And there's a codified process that's involved in making sure that we're not committing engineering resources into building something that is not well thought out or doesn't really solve an actual problem. However, that being said, prior to this current role that I'm in now, this happened all the time for me. And it happened when I was in the field at Databricks. It happened in like every company I've ever worked for prior to my current position, where somebody, I call it box ticking development. And that was one of the things that we talked about before we started recording was it's like, hey, there's this requirement that comes from some place that we need to have X built in order to satisfy some checklist that an executive has. Like, are we safe in this situation? Have we built these 73 things? And they go down and they check boxes. That, but there's a huge disconnect between the person who is crafting those checklists, the person who is checking off those checklists, and the people who are building the things that are the check marks themselves. And I've seen and done a lot of that work where you look at what the requirement is, and I think the worst scenario is you just get the line item from that checklist. Like, we need to build X. That's it. And then it's left up to a data scientist or like a data science leader or an ML engineer or a software engineer. If they don't have the wisdom and the experience to sit back and say, why are we doing this? Or if there isn't a company culture where it's safe to say, should we be doing this? What value does this bring us? Do we need to do this? If there's no pushback to that, you now just own a development task that you might not have clear requirements on, or the requirements are there, but they might not be applicable at all to your company, your organization, or your team. And you're just building something because somebody told you to build it.
So, do you mind taking us down memory lane and providing some tangible examples that you saw in the field at Databricks?
The exact use case that we talked about before we started recording was something I've heard many, many times, usually from like very big customers. And these are big companies, like Fortune 100 companies. And they bring in, they say, well, we have these requirements that we need to adhere to. And sometimes, a lot of the times, you look through those lists and you're like, yeah, this is legit. Like, you should have all this stuff. And either our platform has that and it's just natively supported, or it's something we're working on. We can do this, get on a preview for it and try it out. There might be a couple of rough edges, but we'll work together and make it good. And then there's that other 5% of stuff where you're looking at and you're like, hang on, uh, disaster recovery, or you need high availability. And that'll be like the
Yeah.
requirement, high availability. And of course, it's a cloud deployment. So already when you're talking about the cloud, you're talking about extreme reliability, far more so than anybody. And I know there are people out there that are probably listening. They're like, well, my data center has never gone down. Great. Awesome. Uh, doesn't mean that you're going to have a guaranteed uptime all the time. And I've worked in many places where we had our own data center and somebody pushed a config to effectively like a command management system that allows you an interface to that data center that just bricks it for everybody. You're like, oh, the internal systems are down today. I wonder how long it's going to take them to figure that out. And maybe they have disaster recovery in place that somebody can roll back a commit change to a configuration. Systems are back up and running in less than 5 minutes. Or at some of the places I've worked, uh, there is no log of what somebody did. I mean, it's in the system logs somewhere on one of the computers down there in the data center, but you just have some, you know, Cheeto encrusted fingernail donut munching clown who's just typing in Linux commands at will directly to a keyboard that's attached to a full stack, you know, data center rack, and they're typing in all these Linux commands, and oops, they just changed the permissions for the root directory for all people that are interfacing, which now just breaks all protocol traffic to that server. And it's like, oh, you need sudo access now to even do anything with this server. Good luck reverting that. Chuckles. And stuff like that, it could take 48 hours, it could take a week to recover from if that person is a complete moron, which a lot of times they were, or they get somebody super senior who knows what they're doing, comes down, they're like, what have you done to this system? Like, I have to fix all this stuff. This is going to take me hours. So that human element of what you get in a local data center just doesn't exist in the cloud. There are reliability things that happen in any cloud region. You know, we're all human. We all make mistakes. It's just there's systems in place for most cloud providers that rolling back to known good configurations is pretty much automated. It's really fast. Um, but you also have people that are involved in shipping code. Software engineers are developing stuff all the time, and they do make mistakes. Bugs happen, regressions happen. But for the large majority of cases, a serious region world-ending outage is very rare, and it's usually linked to something like a natural disaster happened and, an entire region of the country is without power for 10 days. So, of course, the data center doesn't have enough diesel to run all of its generators for that amount of time. They need to shut things off so that their cooling systems don't go down and they start melting copper inside the data center. So, yeah, that can happen. But are you doing business anyway at that time? And, you know, when I've seen those line items in the past, I'm just like, okay, what do you want us to do? You want us to create a way for you to exfil data from production that's in this one region to this other region and then get that up and running within 2 hours in the event that a once in a century storm hits. Cool. Uh, we can think about that, I guess, but the data center is not going to be accepting any traffic. So you want to map your configuration from one region to another and then start that new region up and have all the data ingest. What are we talking about here? Do we need cross region replication for our data? Okay, we can do that. The cloud providers all provide that. You can send data to every region for that provider if you want, if you're willing to pay for it. It's not cheap. And then the question then becomes, well, how do we know it's an exact snapshot of production? It's like, well, now we're talking about, a shadow deployment effectively of your services. So, double the fun, double the money. You're now running two versions of production in real time at all times. So every time a packet of data comes into one data center, it's now, going to both data centers. It's processed by the exact same production ETL, the exact same ML models, everything is identical. And I've been in situations where you're talking to some engineering executive at that company, or like data science manager or something. And they're like, yeah, that's what we want. Like, must be nice to just be able to burn money. That's cool, I guess. Like, how many users are going to be on that versus how many on your main? Like, well, everybody's going to be on the main one because we want collaboration, but we want that other region to be available at any time. Like, that's whatever your cloud budget is right now, just multiply times two, and that's your operating cost. And then you're going to need some more people that you're going to have to hire that are going to have to maintain that. Okay, let's say that we have that budget. How do we verify that all the information is exactly correct? And that's where it becomes complex. And you're like, well, we have to do validation checks periodically. We'd have to extract, like, do table dumps from region A, send it to region B with the exact same filter and make sure that the data exactly matches or the models are the exact same. Are we going to be retraining a non-deterministic model in parallel across regions on the same data, but that determinism now means that the model is going to be slightly different? Is that okay? Or do we have to migrate the model over as part of its training evolution? The devil's in the details with all this stuff, where you start thinking about, what do you mean by exact replication and how far down this rabbit hole are we going to go?
Yeah,
Like,
so
what are the requirements?
Ben just summarized in about 10 minutes what we talked about for the last hour. And I would be curious. So, first of all, a lot of the requirements that are brought down from higher levels of management are not always based in reality. And so, what I would actually love to brainstorm with you, Ben, and try to figure out basically the cause and the solution for this. So, disaster recovery, when there's an entire Azure region outage or GCP or whatever cloud you're using, if there's an entire region outage, you cannot run stuff. You have to move to a different region where there's not an earthquake or a hurricane, and the server racks are actually operational. That said, it would be sort of beneficial to have, I don't know. It'd be great to, like, understand why people think that's such a big problem. Um, and especially if there's the SLA of 999 or 59 uptime guarantees, why are people so tied to having this shadow deployment that's actually ready in another region? Do you know why that's the case, Ben?
I think most of it's due to they got burned in the past because of some crazy natural disaster, or they had their own data center that there was a fire in the corner of the data center, and the fire department came in and opened the hoses and ruined all the data center, racks. And now they have to, you know, start thinking about how to recover business operations. And it becomes a bit complex and disruptive to the business. You can talk about, like, hey, we lost this amount of revenue because of this thing that happened. And people panic at that. They never want that to happen again. It could be from high up, like board of directors level, saying, excuse me, CTO, you need to figure out a solution where this never happens again to this business because we lost a ton of money or a ton of business because of this. So yeah, you're gonna have this reactionary nature associated with that, and the person who's being told by the people that can fire them from their very cushy job, um, they're gonna understandably come up with a bullet list item to say, hey, what happened down in Puerto Rico, make sure this never happens again. Is that person who's at that level making that decision the one who's going to know how all of this stuff works? No, they're not. They're not close to the metal anymore, if they even were in the first place. So they're going to come up with a list of requirements, or maybe just that one item. Like, make sure that we're covered in this situation, because if not, the board of directors is going to remove me. Um, and they're going to pass that down to people on the front lines to figure out how to do it. Now, does everybody who's working on problems like that, are they equipped to deal with that? In my experience, no.
Right.
You need people that have that expertise, and most of those people work for the cloud providers. So you need to start making some friends and making some calls and asking lots of questions. Before long, you start realizing, wow, we're in over our heads. This is so much to think about. This is multiple years of work that we have to engage in order to have this, to meet this requirement of like being covered in this eventuality.
Yeah, I'm going to test out a hypothesis and would love feedback. When thinking about these types of massive decisions that impact lots of an organization, seems like there are two ways that an executive could get this wrong. The first is, as you mentioned, not understanding the system and sort of the pros and cons of the system. So take disaster recovery. The con is, all right, you can't do stuff in your cloud if there's an Azure outage region or region outage. That's the con. Uh, but on the flip side of that, to account for that con, you have to develop a disaster recovery solution. You have to test it, and you also have to pay for all the storage and the compute that deploys that disaster recovery solution. So
Mhm.
it's sort of this continuous trade-off where there's pros, there's cons, and there's sort of an inflection point where you should be doing this or should not be doing this. I would argue that a lot of executives don't even think about a lot of the pros and cons list, and they're just like, this is a requirement, get it done. Do you think that's the case?
I wouldn't pigeonhole everybody into that, classification. I work with CTOs that are like ex-engineers. They're super smart. They can know, just looking at a line item like that, like, okay, we need to hire 100 more people to do this properly. They know, they're not idiots. I've also worked with some executives that I'm like, yeah, this person has an MBA. They they started straight out of college down like a business and management track. They're now in charge of a technological organization, and they have no clue, which is fine. As an executive, you can come from a technical background, or you can come from just a leadership background. Totally fine, right? It shouldn't be the role of an executive to figure out how to do anything. It's what to do and why to do it.
All right. So if you're non-technical, how do you go about assessing whether something is worth the maintenance and development cost?
You don't. If you're in a position of management, your role is not technological decisions, in my opinion. Unless you're a first line leader where, you're a manager, senior manager of a technical team, usually you come from that background and you're learning more about leadership and how to manage teams and the HR side of the business and keeping your people happy and motivated and stuff. That's the role of a manager. Um, the people that are making that requirement, what they should be doing, and I've seen this work out very well in situations where they don't have the context and they know they don't have the context, but that leader person, their only job is to hire people that do know how to make that determination. Like, hey, should we do this? Yes or no? Get feedback from people who know. And a good leader is going to do that and collate all of the opinions and all of the data associated with people's responses and make a command decision based on, like, this is the direction we're going in due to this list of 37 items that we've verified because we've done research and you know did our homework.
Right.
And like, organizations that function that way function really well, in my opinion. And from all the evidence that I've accrued through a career of working in tech so far, is those leaders that listen and know how to properly delegate stuff like that to the people who will know, but are open about receiving answers from that they might not want to hear. Um, if they're truth seeking people, if that's what drives them, they just want to know an answer that's correct, then it's pretty effective. Um, on the converse side of that, though, uh, a lot of these companies that have requirements like that or requests like that, whether it's explicitly based in reality or not, it seems to me, and companies that I've seen, the bigger the company, the more fear there is
Mm,
from first line leaders and tech leads about communicating bad news to executives. So instead of arguing, this is what they feel like it is, instead of saying like we shouldn't do this and this is why, they're terrified of doing that. Or maybe they did that once and then they got told to shut up by some director or VP or something. And the lead executive that's requesting that this get done, that response never gets to their level. There's too many layers of management in between, so that the phone tree doesn't function correctly. Uh, so that poor person who's putting that requirement together, they don't even know that it's a stupid thing for them, or it's useless, or maybe it's valuable, but it requires some serious investment of time and resources in order to do properly. So
got
what
it.
they end up doing is everybody's just kind of, the people that know better are kind of looking around, just like, man, does nobody else realize this is stupid? Like, why would we do? We could get this done in 3 months, like they said that we were supposed to, but it's gonna be junk, and it's not gonna be validated. If we ever have to fail over, there's all this stuff that's probably gonna go wrong because we're not doing integration testing. We're not even updating these scripts that we're using to build this new environment. It's not part of our release process, or if it is, it's now slowing development down. So 1 week worth of feature development to say like add 3 new tables to our data warehouse, and if those 3 tables aren't reflected in the migration scripts and then aren't tested as well to make sure that it works correctly in that environment, um, yeah, it's just going to be a dumpster fire if this ever happens. But because the prevalence of this is so low, it's like once in 20 years sort of event, it just doesn't happen. And people are like, well, let's let's fulfill the requirement, check the box, and then move on. We have direct disaster recovery. Does it work? Nobody knows.
Got it. All right. So let me see if I can recap my takeaways. So typically, managers or directors will not just blindly request something. They hopefully will think through it critically and understand the pros and cons. Um, that said, oftentimes it's really hard to estimate the exact con and the exact pro and the cost associated. So again, if there's a region outage, how much does that cost? Also, for the solution that would mitigate that disaster, how much does the maintenance and development cost? Both of those are sometimes difficult to estimate. And so making a decision based on those moving targets and nebulous unclear targets, um, that can lead to incorrect decisions. Is that about right?
I mean, even managers and directors aren't going to know the answer to this. They shouldn't. It's not their job. What a manager or a director, what a director should know, like good directors, and the ones that I work with now are freaking fantastic at this. They know what team has the person who can best answer questions that they have about this. So they know who to ask and they know who to delegate collecting all of these responses. So the director will tell, these three managers, hey, have these 18 people that are across your six teams provide feedback on this. Tell us, is this even feasible? Let's do a prototype real quick and see, like, hey, we're going to time box this to 3 days and we'll have like five people work on this. If this blows up and just doesn't work at all at the end of 3 days, we've learned a lot about what the complexity is of this. But if we get a working prototype of something and this kind of works, in this one situation, it gives us an understanding of the scope of this instead of just guessing at the scope and be like, "Whoa," you're always going to have somebody who's going to sandbag and be like, "Well, this is 26 person weeks of effort." Like, do you know really? Like, we know this is just large work. Let's go talk to the people that have done work like this in the past and ask them and say, how long do you think it would take to build these 37 or these 38 components of this system that we're talking about? And you get some architect or principal engineer, somebody who's, been in the industry 20, 30 years, get their take on it and say, hey, can you help scope this and talk to all the people that are involved? And like, what is the big picture here about how big of a change is this going to be and how many resources do we need? All of that happens before that little checklist gets created, or it should get created, to say, like, can we do this? How much is it going to cost in time, money, new hires? Do we need to create a new team? Do we need a new management organization around this? Like, all of the business impacts to this thing. Is it so important that it outweighs, the cost of doing this?
Yeah.
That's just the business side. That's management's job. Figure all that stuff out. But from the technical side, where you're asking the questions from, just like, should we do this from a technical perspective? Like, can we do this right? That's the tech lead job, is to come up with, here's the scope. Like, you're not thinking when you're doing requirements docs and planning out a project, you're not thinking about, should we do this? That's not the job of a TL. TL is, tell us what it takes to get this done. And it's management's job to figure out, should we do this? Yes or no?
So you are the TL of ML Flow open source, and as a leader and somewhat of a decision maker, you're obviously assigned a lot of projects, but I've been part of stand-ups. There have been many features where you're just like, hell no, we're not doing this. And I was wondering how much transparency you think is required, and also what's the optimal amount of transparency for a team of your size, but then also within an organization. And to double click into the question, I am an RSA. I am some level in Databricks. Should I be able to go to Ali, our CEO, and say, "Hey, why did you make this decision?" Or should there be a Google Doc explaining why he made that decision? That'd be really transparent. That would probably be the most extreme level of transparency, and I would maybe like that, but it's a lot of work. And conversely, should everything come down from Ali as God's word where a lowly RSA can't question it? Where's the balance?
Wow. Um, so he does not act like that, by the way, at all. So he's not a dictator. Um, None of the founders are at the company. Uh, they are they are so wedded to the truth or the seeking of the truth. I've never seen a group of people more focused on that. Like, they they embody the absence of hubris, in my opinion, because they have ideas. They have great ideas. They have bad ideas, like, just like anybody else does. But they don't look at their position title and say, "Well, I'm CTO or I'm CEO, or and this is how it's going to be." They give directives to the teams that own components and say, "I would like to do this, and I think this is a good thing to do. Please tell me what it would take to do this." And then from that initial statement, everything else is documented. Where it's like, this is a major initiative that we're going to be getting into. So we need to like figure out who needs to be involved in this. And we don't need to involve everybody because there's no time. If everybody was involved in everything that's going on, nobody would get anything done. So who are the relevant stakeholders in making an evaluation of this project? And then who's going to lead it? You need a leader for this project. Sometimes that is a TL who's drafting up a review document or design document, and then that person opens that design document up for commentary by anybody who would potentially have a say in this. That's not restrictive. That's very open. A lot of times it goes out to the whole department to be like, hey, open call on comments. I've seen PRDs that have as little as 3 comments on them. And then at the top, it's just got approved. Green box. Good to go. Let's do it. And then I've seen PRDs where there's 7,000 comments on it. When you look through the comment history, like, whoa, this is crazy. Because that doesn't mean that the design was bad. It means this is important. People have a lot of opinions on it. And there's a lot of evidence that needs to be added to this because this could potentially be disruptive to the department or to the company. So we need to really think this through. Sometimes that review process can take an entire quarter. Sometimes it can take an entire year. I've seen for certain projects where you're doing prep work, like engineering development work and feature development work in preparation for that decision to be said, okay, now we're ready to start the work on this massive project because we've done all of this lead up work and we've proven that we can actually support this. Let's do it now. And then you form cross-functional teams and you know, it gets pretty exciting, when you see all that stuff working together. But everything at any point, anybody who's in that decision process can ask the question, like, why are we doing this? And you'll get an answer. You're not going to get yelled at. But if you're not involved in that, like if something's being done in the SQL side of Databricks, and even though I'm in engineering, if I go up and say to one of the TLs or the managers or directors or something, be like, why are we doing this? They they would probably be very confused why I was asking that. And they wouldn't yell at me or anything. They'd just be like, we're curious, like, what part of what you do is going to be affected by this? Um, and I would not be able to give them a rational answer. I'd be like, oh, I'm just curious. They'd be like, okay, well, please read the doc. The doc should tell you why we're doing this. That's the first 3 pages of it. Hopefully that's clear. And if it's not, let us know. We'll add some more information to it. Nobody does that. I definitely would never do that. I don't have context. I have no clue why they're doing what they're doing if I didn't read that doc. And usually when I read the doc, I'm like, oh yeah, it's a pretty good idea. Cool. Now, if they're touching something that does touch stuff that we deal with, they're going to tag us on that. Like, hey, please review this section. This affects you, or this is something that we need help from your team and input on, and we'll give that. And it's very collaborative and very friendly. Everybody's trying to help each other out because we need help too. And that's just kind of how it works. But if you're so far removed from making decisions like that or having the context, um, yeah, you'd probably get the same response that I just explained. And people being like, "Why do you care? Like, here's the doc if you want to read it, but just curious, why do you have an issue with this?" Or sort of thing.
Here's a saucy question before we move on to solutions. Do you think the decision to acquire Mosaic ML for Databricks, which is an ML company that we got for $1.3 billion, do you think the design doc or decision doc that was generated in Ali's head should be public to the entire organization?
No, not at all.
Why?
Zero context.
Hmm.
That
And
is a
look,
founder and board of directors decision, that's a business decision.
mhm. But
Do I
should
think it was the right one? Hell yeah.
yeah,
Do I think it was well thought out and meticulously planned and homework was done? Oh, yes.
got
No,
it.
nobody at the top of this company makes decisions like that without really thinking it through and trying to even convince themselves that they're potentially making the wrong decision, and they'll debate. I'm sure there was very fascinating, would have been cool to be a fly on the wall in some of those meetings where they're all sitting around talking about this and debating it.
Right.
And it's thorough
Yeah.
because people are not dummies.
Okay. Cool. So I just wanted to be clear that there is sort of a limit to transparency, and too much transparency, it not only creates a lot of work for the decision makers to package up their decision into a readable format, but also, like, if I disagree with the decision or agree with the decision, it doesn't matter. And while it might be cool, as Ben said, to be a fly on the wall, it reduces the efficiency of the organization and the velocity if people are going and sort of micromanaging all these high level decisions. So there's a balance.
Well, there's also something to be said about if you were to, like on our team, we generate a design, which you've seen a ton of them. We do them all the time. We create a design doc of a solution that we have to some potential, feature request. Something needs to get built. Would you say they're fairly thorough with what we generate?
I
Like
would.
thought out?
Yes.
Yeah, they're pretty thorough. Even things that we call like one decision doc, they're usually like 5 or 7 or, go through and list out all the pros and cons, examples of alternatives that we could use. They're very extensive. But if every one of those that we filed, if we had to send out to the entire company, and you've seen how many we do, it's around about 10 a quarter, and that's just for 5 people, right? Imagine if all 1,500 engineers at Databricks did that and sent that out to everybody. Your inbox would be a never ending list. Like every day, you'd probably have 20 more to read through. And each of those documents are going to be anywhere from 2 to 50 pages long of very small text with diagrams. I get those. TLs get notified on like almost all of them that go out within your department. I can follow along with most of the stuff in our department because I have context of like all the moving pieces and parts. But there's certain aspects even within department in ML. I'm like, I don't have context at all on how feature store works. I know that we interface with it. We know their APIs. That's as that's as far as it goes. I don't know their source code. I don't know how they do what they do. I don't have time to learn what they like how they do what they do. So if I got that design doc and I started making comments, the relevancy of the comments that I could come up with would be suspect. And it would probably just look like an uninformed person asking questions that are irrelevant. So I don't leave comments. If
Right.
I'm curious, I might like skim through it and be like, "Oh, that's really cool. Like, look at what Alcus is doing. That's awesome." But that's as far as it goes. I'm not going to leave a comment because I just don't know. I don't have their level of context.
Cool. So let's say we have a decision. We do have some level of context where our input would be valuable, and we think this decision is terrible. It is going to be really expensive to build, really expensive to maintain, and the cost of not building a solution for it, not that high. It's not that big of a deal. Let's take turns giving some tips for people who are in this situation on how to approach talking to people above them and telling that person above them that, hey, your idea is maybe not the best and we shouldn't do this.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to start us off?
I mean, pro tip number one. Uh, it's one of our company mottos. It's something that, particularly in engineering, is adhered to pretty extensively. Let the data decide. And that's a catchphrase that might sound cliche and kind of cringy, but when you really think about it, all that is saying use the freaking scientific method. You have a hypothesis, your opinion of something. Go and collect the evidence. So in the realm of software, that becomes very simple, right? We're not talking about physical engineering here or medical science or something that in order to prove out your hypothesis could take months to do. If you're, you know, even okay at software development, you should be able to prove your theory that you have or prove out whether something's going to work in less than an hour. Go write some code. Take that code, clean it up, put it into a document. Create that document. And that document is not your idea sucks, my opinion's correct. Here's all the evidence to do that. That tone is not going to work anywhere you go. People are just going to look at you and be like, "What an a-hole." Nobody's going to want to work with you. But if it's an analysis where you're saying, "I'm seriously considering and I'm approaching this with an open mind saying, can we do this? And here's the decisions that we'll need to make." That's a design doc where you're saying, "I'm thinking through this problem and trying to make it work. Where are we going to get tripped up and what are the complexities involved?" And that's the creative aspect of software development. Doesn't matter if you're doing ML, pure data science, statistical stuff, or pure software engineering. That design phase where you're thinking through the problem and using your creativity and your wisdom and experience to write out, hey, what could go wrong here? Or what do we need to actually build in order to make this thing work? And then, okay, let's dive into that. What are the components that need to be built to make these features a thing? And you keep on diving lower and lower until you find something that's like, is there a solution that already exists for this? Can we use that? Does it meet the requirements? Or do we need to build something? And if it's in that, hey, we need to build something for this, now we need to think about, what does professional software development look like? Are we staffed to support this increased feature load? What is the maintenance burden for this? How are we going to test it? Where's it going to run? Do we have infrastructure that can run this? Have we ever done this before? Who owns the code? Who owns the maintenance? What's the process for escalating in case this breaks? How severe is this if this goes down? So all of those questions, that's like a new product division that you're now talking about of like, hey, a team needs to own this. They need to build it. They need to design it, then build it, then maintain it and set up, CI/CD for it. We need to make sure that this is all covered and we can know if the system has an issue with it. It's a lot of work, you know. So that document is what's gonna provide guidance to not just it provides guidance to you as you're thinking through the problem. That's why I love them. When I'm working on something new that's like very vague, I'm like, how am I gonna solve this? I start writing down the big ideas that I start thinking about, like, okay, what is involved here? Uh, and then start thinking about what could go wrong. It's just this creative pursuit. You start, writing down a bunch of ideas. And then I go back a couple hours later and start deleting stuff. I'm like, that was stupid, or that's irrelevant, or oh man, I totally forgot about these things. Add these three things. And then start playing devil's advocate, saying, can I challenge myself that my logic here is correct or flawed? Like pick apart your own hypothesis. And then anything that you need evidence on that you can't just say, I think this is going to be this, or I think this is going to be a problem. It's like, no, prove that it's going to be a problem or that it's fine. And that's done via code and results. Uh, and then once you're done with all that, you need to get feedback. Pass it around to peers of you who are in similar positions of authority, or seniority, and make sure that they're looking at it without context, because you get blinded by your own context, your bias that you have when when thinking through something because you've already made these decisions in your head about here's the four options. I think option two is the best one, and here's why. Well, an independent observer might come in and say, I don't know why you came to that conclusion. However, I do know that your logic is flawed. Like, I can't read what you wrote here and infer why your decision is the most obvious one. Please add more evidence and convince me.
Right.
And that forces you to go back and be like, oh, okay. And sometimes that forces you to be like, actually, option one was better because now I really went through the process of thinking through this and or proving to myself that which one is the best. So if you're not doing that and you're tackling big line item checkbox items, you're doing yourself, your team, your organization, and your company a huge disservice.
So in true TL fashion, make sure you scope out the solution. Is that the one-liner?
It's it sounds like a one-liner and it sounds like it's easy, but
Of course.
let me tell you, that's the hardest part of software development. Writing code's simple, right? Hmm. Once you get a number of years under your belt, it's like whatever. Implementation is an implementation. You have peer review for that. Everybody's helping everybody else out with things that might not be done correctly. You have automated systems to validate that your code is correct. But the design phase, if you mess that up, which it does get messed up, right? If that wasn't messed up, we would never build flawed software.
Right.
Um, but if you're not spending more time planning and designing than you are on implementing, you have a higher probability of creating garbage that you'll end up throwing away.
Yep. All right. My tip is less on the implementation and scoping side, and it's more about navigating an organizational hierarchy. I think one of the most important things is understanding the chain of command and the incentives at each level. So your manager is probably looking to please their manager, who's looking to please their manager until the buck stops somewhere. And if you are several levels down and you disagree with the top level decision, you not only have to convince your manager that this is incorrect, but their manager and their manager. And the person that is going to be convincing the person above them is that person. So your argument has to be so good and so clean that your manager will vouch for that idea to their manager. Typically, it's rare that you can sort of skip level all the way up to the decision maker if you're sort of low level. And so, with that, it's really important to know who's involved and their incentives. Not to paint a negative light, but often people are A, biased, and B, have ulterior motives. And at an organization like Databricks, it's pretty solid. But I've worked with so many organizations that are just looking to check boxes and continue on with their day to day. So getting inside the head of each level and figuring out what you need to appeal to convince them of something, uh, I've often seen that be a requirement for making change. And if you don't do that, nothing happens.
Yeah, it's pretty true. Um, Knowing how to play the politics game, particularly in consulting, is very valid, like very, very valuable. Um, you can't appeal to reason as an outsider and just implicitly be trusted. So evidence-based arguments are incredibly important. Um, if you don't have that, it's a completely hollow argument. Nobody's gonna, anybody
Right.
who's good is gonna ask, like, show me, like, show me why you say this is such a bad idea. And if you can't convince them with, I guess that's the other part of our discussion is what happens when you know, an unstoppable force hits an immovable object. Uh, if you go up against somebody who does have the authority to say, just do it, and you have all the evidence that shows this is a stupid thing to do, what do you do?
Yeah, that's another episode.
I mean, I can tell you what I do. Uh,
Yes.
I don't have to do it anymore, um, because just not in that sort of situation ever anymore. Um, but in the past, if it was something that was trivial, insignificant, I didn't really have that much vested into it. I don't arbitrarily pick mountains to die on with regards to work that I do. I'll just say thank you for listening to my opinion. Here's the document again for you to peruse in the future if you so choose. I'll go and build that now, but I'm not going to just do a BS job of building something in the most half-assed manner just to check a box. I'd start the process of saying, I'm going to start the design and I'd like your feedback on it as we develop this. And here's the scope of what's going on. And if they start arguing saying, "Oh, I don't believe that 12 weeks is of scope for that. Let's make that 2 weeks." I'm like, "All right, I need 6 times as many people then. Can we get like hire more people to do this or hire consultants or something?" When you make a question about money, if they're like, "Hey, I need to do this the right way and I'm not going to sacrifice quality because that's your name at a place. If you're a technical person, what you're building is your own reputation or the reputation of your team, which should trump your own reputation, by the way. Um, if you compromise on that and just ship it because it's never going to be used or it's not that important, if it sucks and it's broken, guess who they're going to blame? They're not going to blame that manager or that director that told you to build it. They're going to look at who built this. What an idiot. Like, who would think that this is a good idea? Where's
Yeah.
the design doc for this? That's exactly what people are going to say or
That
think.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. You don't have to convince prior to making the decision. If you get overruled, you can convince throughout the decision and say, "All right, if you actually want to go down this route, it's going to be prohibitively expensive. Are you going to fund it or not?" That's a
Mhm.
great idea. Yeah. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not about trying to get your way by doing that. It's the end goal is try to build what's right.
Right, exactly. And so
And
either way, you don't build a wrong thing by just not building it, or you build a very complex right thing, a very expensive right thing. Both of those are
however complex it needs to be to
exactly.
meet the
Yeah.
requirements. And then
Yeah.
if the requirements need to be relaxed, then that's a win. That's the trade-off.
Mhm.
That's how all software is developed actually at companies is at the big companies at least. Um, everything is a compromise. You know, take any feature that you've seen us do, and if you just think about it for a moment, um, realize that throughout that entire process and the development process, we were making compromises. You have to. You
Yeah.
can't support every use case. You can't support every feature. You can't do it all, and you can't. There's the scales of balance are between number of features and usability versus stability. So the more cool things you bake into this, the more awesome things it does. That's now all like higher maintenance burden that you've just placed on the team. Like, whoa, I have this PR that has 14,000 lines of code. Look at all the cool things it does. People on the team, what everybody's reaction is going to be. Hey, can you split this up? And uh, do we really need to be doing all this stuff? Like, do we need this? And the motivation for that is this is gonna break 6 months from now. How much effort is it gonna be for us to fix that? And then when it breaks 3 months after that, because some other thing that changes, or when we need to modify this behavior, how many lines of code do we have to change, and how complex is that gonna be? How many tests do we have to write here? Yeah, it's all compromise.
Heard. All right. Let me think of one more. So I think I'll go back to the soft side. I think that, at least typically for me, my logic is pretty sound. And would that when I make incorrect decisions, it's often based out of incorrect starting first principles. And so I think it's really important to have some levels of humility about what you know and try to really be empathetic and figure out where the decision maker is coming from. Oftentimes, managers live in a very different world than where you live. They talk to different people, they're privy to different amounts of information. And so being humble and saying, this doesn't make sense to me. This is why it doesn't make sense. And maybe presenting that really quickly in a concise manner. That's a great way to approach it. But at the same time, have faith in the people around you because
Mhm.
you aren't always privy to what they are.
Yeah, and the more complex your job is, and the more cutting edge your company slash team is, the faster you will realize,
Oh, yeah.
and the higher velocity that your team has. The sooner you will realize that you most certainly do not have context. And if it seems like you're surrounded by smart people, you probably are. And if you have questions, ask, like pose those questions. Don't be like, "Hey, I think this is a bad idea." It's more like, "Can I get more information
Yes.
on this aspect?" Mm. In that 30-second exchange, you'll probably get all of the context, and then all of a sudden it'll make sense to you of like why you're doing this. Like, oh, but that's the thing that I would always do with customers when I was talking to them. When I'd see those line items, I would approach it in that way. Like, could you explain to me like what is entailed here and why are we doing this?
Exactly.
And it scared me, and I knew I had to take those different tactics when I got an entire room full of blank stares, some slack-jawed, drooling stares of people being like, "We don't know why." Like, well, who knows why? Like, what are the requirements here? And people just shrugging, looking at each other like, "We don't know. Y We hired you to come and do this. Like, what do you want me to do?" Like, I need some sort of project plan here about what the reasoning is here. And if nobody knows, then keep on escalating higher and higher. Because that senior person in the room, when you're having that conversation, if they don't have context, then it's time to be a little panicked. They should know. Whoever's giving you that task and saying,
Yeah.
this is what we're going to be working on. This is why it's important. If they are just like, hey, my boss said we got to do this, and I don't know why, maybe that person doesn't know why either. That's the scary situation. That's where you start asking the questions.
Yeah. Exactly. It's about finding truth. And hopefully someone in the organization has truth. If they don't, then there's no truth. And that's pretty scary.
Yes, I have worked for those companies, by the way.
Hmm. Sounds like a lot of fun.
It was not.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right, cool. So I'm going to wrap. Um, Today we talked about decision making, specifically pushing up against a decision maker whose decision you disagree with. First of all, good decision makers know who they should ask when scoping a project. Their job is to collect a bunch of information from reliable sources. And a really important component of that is having those reliable sources, having the people that you can confide in and that you can know will give you truth. A tech lead's role is to determine can we do this and how, but a director is more focused on should we do this. And this is typically a collaborative approach where a director will go to a tech lead, understand the risk involved in building something, but then also on the converse side, understanding how not building that solution would impact the organization. And then if you're not involved in decision making, you probably shouldn't be privy to that decision. You should have faith in your decision makers and leaders that they're doing a good job. But if you are privy to the decision making process, it's great to have an open format where you can discuss, such as a design doc. And then finally, we concluded with some tips. So, anything else, Ben, before we end the recording?
No, it's a fun episode.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, until next time, it's been Michael Burke and my co-host.
Ben Wilson.
And have a good day, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.